Welcome to World Energy Television. I'm Richard Loomis, CEO of World Energy. We don't have to go far to see what's happening in the world today. The headlines are covering the current financial crisis. The price of oil, interestingly, is coming down. But we have gasoline shortages in the Southeast. To help us kind of connect all these dots, we're going to go across the board with Matt Simmons, chairman of Simmons & Company and author of Twilight in the Desert. Matt, thank you very much for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Well, the headlines are interesting, aren't they?
Yes, it's a very unusual time we're going through right now. And one of the things I find most interesting is watching the gibberish of a whole bunch of energy experts that turned out to be so utterly wrong over the last 10 years, now basically trying to recapture the high ground by blaming the financial crisis on the high oil prices.
Do you remember the editorial you wrote for my monthly magazine, where energy pundits ruined my Saturday morning?
I do. I'd actually forgotten that.
I think it is very interesting how we're getting a real 180 and connections I don't believe are real. How do you see this current deal on Wall Street?
Well, I think it's a travesty, and it's a train wreck that anybody with a head on their shoulders could have seen coming. But because I follow energy far more than I follow what's happening in the financial markets, I really didn't have a clue how screwball this whole subprime mortgage thing was. This makes the dot-com thing, look like a kid's game of tiddlywinks.
Well, and you've been in banking a long time.
No, I grew up in a banking family, so I've got both commercial banking in my DNA and 39 years of being in the investment banking business. I'm almost embarrassed to call myself an investment banker because of the shenanigans going on in Wall Street. When Enron happened, and then after Enron we put in Sarbanes-Oxley, I spoke at time and time again about the fact how stupid that we've changed the corporate boardrooms into being a checklist of whether we're good or not, and in the meantime we've lost the time to talk about the real business. We should have put in the insane asylum or in jail the top 30 to 50 guys on Wall Street that created these special purpose entities and sold them all around the country. Everybody's doing this, they're perfectly legal, but because we didn't do that, we put Jeff Skilling and Andy Fasto in jail, which they should have probably been there, but there's a whole different issue. That left Wall Street with a sense that they could get away with anything.
Well, there's a lot of similarities, just from the outside looking in,
to
what this
Enron
is and what
wouldn't even
Enron
be a story
was.
today.
Yeah.
It would make page 42. But literally, then I started watching the settlements. $1.1 billion paid by Merrill Lynch to just get we didn't do anything wrong. We just want to get this behind us. And I said, we're really letting these guys feel like they can do anything. And then I watched the pay escalation. How can the guy that wrecked Merrill Lynch walk away with $140 million? Why doesn't somebody say, we'd like you to disgorge your bonus? Sandy Well made $1 billion. He didn't found Citibank, he didn't found Salomon Brothers, he didn't found Travelers, and so we literally created an environment that you could get away with anything. Between Phil Gramm and Alan Greenspan, you created a sense that the more we left free markets to operate unfettered, the more efficient the markets would be. And I think, what has happened to regulation and oversight?
I recall when Lee Raymond left ExxonMobil, his $100 million salary.
$450.
Was it $450?
Well, I think it was his. And that was because the stock had gone way up.
Well, now we watch what happens here on Wall Street. And those that have brought these firms down are taking enormous salaries. Yeah,
the guy that basically was there for 13 weeks.
It doesn't make much sense.
Well, they're creating an impression, and when the House Republicans, who I think probably committed hara-kiri, voted the bailout down, they apparently did that because their constituencies over the weekend were, just shouting at them, saying, "I don't want these guys, these fat cats, to basically be bailed out." But in the background, you have this impression that because oil prices have come plummeting down from $147 a barrel in July to, a couple of weeks ago, a low of $90, we have created an impression that we basically now, done away with any more growth in oil demand, and we've solved our problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other idea that's prevalent right now is the idea of drill here, drill now, and that's our panacea.
Yeah, that is really just, intellectual dishonesty or energy illiteracy.
Well, and you tie the two together. Obviously we've started this mantra, the prices come down, problem solved.
Problem solved. Our offshore drilling bans are over. We're not going to drill for oil. The hurricanes are over. We didn't do any damage, and in the meantime, basically, we're hemorrhaging.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the gasoline shortages in the southeast bring this to mind.
The where?
In Georgia and
in Baltimore, Richmond, Virginia,
and keep going around the country. Yeah. Yes.
What we really don't have a very good idea of so far is how widespread the gasoline shortages are getting. Because the primary news has ironically been out of Atlanta, because in Atlanta, apparently, from what I heard early this morning, 2/3 of the service stations are now shut. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons we know so much about that is that CNN is headquartered in Atlanta.
Right.
But what you don't really have a lot of news about is how we're doing in Nashville, how we're doing in Knoxville. Last Friday afternoon, I had a brief interview with a reporter from the NPR station in Washington, D.C. on the gasoline shortage. The guy said, now, Mr. Simmons, you were quoted several times this week that we have gasoline shortages, and apparently they're in Atlanta. But they certainly don't seem to be in many other places. Is that correct? And I said, well, 10 minutes ago, I Googled gasoline outage, and let me tell you what I found. Richmond, Virginia, Baltimore, Maryland, Frederick, Maryland, Spartanburg, South Carolina, Charlotte, North. He said, wait a second. You said Richmond, Virginia, and Baltimore. That's kind of greater D.C. I don't think there are any shortages there. I said, well, do you want me to read you
what it says?
What it says. This is the Richmond Daily News. This is he said, that's amazing. I haven't heard anything about this. I said, that's the issue, is that we have had, the headlines have been so violent this week about the meltdown, and also the fact, obviously the hurricanes are over, but what we basically did is we basically kind of ripped apart the infrastructure, and so when you have not much coming in and a lot going out, we're basically draining the pipelines, and that's why we're running out of gas. Now, what's interesting is that there's no evidence that basically the problem is going to be over in the next day or two or a week or two. And until we put in some driving bans in, we're slowly basically, it's like someone draining the blood out of your body. I said, that's a pretty gruesome example. I said, well, and the big threat we have is that if all of a sudden this erupts just the same way the ticking time bomb financial crisis did, no one paid attention to it until there was a run on the bank, then Lehman goes and AIG goes. If America suddenly tops up their tanks, we have in finished motor gasoline stocks, as opposed to blending components, we have about 85 million barrels of gasoline supply in our primary system. That's not our secondary or tertiary system. There are 220 million cars on the road. If you assume the average car has a 20-gallon tank, and maybe it's 18, it doesn't matter, and that they're now on average have 5 gallons in their tank, and they top up their tank, there goes 80 million barrels just like that. And we could run dry.
Well, in other parts of the country, we're seeing the price of gasoline come down.
Well, that's the problem, is that gasoline prices are reflecting the fact that there's no problem, just like crude oil prices. So price signals got turned off. But if we topped up our tanks, then we would basically run out of gasoline, and just faster than Lehman Brothers melted down. We'd have a run on the bank. If we run out of gasoline, it would take, my guess is, at the very best, if we ban driving, well, we will ban driving, de facto. It'll take months to fill the system back up. In the meantime, we have about 5 to 7 days before America runs out of food. And that would become the greatest crisis in the history of the United States.